it's the subtle social things that you pick up on that are unsaid. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's like
that's I think she's what she's best at. All of it. Like I wrote down in my notes here. You're talking about chapter 17, right? Like that dinner scene. So I called it, but in
which
my
is
version,
huge. It's a
yeah,
huge part of this book.
the
It's like
longest
maybe
chapter, I
it's
think.
this, I would sort of say like it's maybe like the central
It is, yeah.
event
And
or like
you feel it. You feel it as you're reading it, and like I just page in my version, it's pages 60 to page 80, roughly. Yeah, page 60 to
well,
page
because it's the
80.
only time where all of these people are together and interacting, and we're sort of watching all of them through their internal monologue, except for the few whose minds we never see into, like Carmichael or, like some of the kids or,
Uh,
yeah.
that dinner scene, chapter 17 in book one or section one, pages 60 to 80 in the Wordsworth edition I have. I wrote down in my notes the dinner scene is absolutely great. It's long, but we get the like it's the absolute like masterclass in craft, particularly of her style. If you read nothing else in this book, just read chapter 17 of section 1, like those 20 pages. Just, and you were already talking about it, like the way we bounce around, the table, and everybody's inner monologue is interacting with everybody else's, but they don't know it, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
it's just, and like the dialogue, she's using that same dialogue technique where there's a little bit of speech and then she just tells us what they said instead of giving us the actual structured dialogue. Like, and it just bounces around and it works. I was reminded of, like, when we did Wharton House of Mirth. Like, it was witty, it was so fucking witty, and it was great. Like, it was a masterclass in her style, the way she uses that to a T. Like, just perfectly blends all of these different inner monologues seamlessly going from one to the other, and you feel like you're at that table, right? Like, you feel like you're in everybody's head and they're all interacting. They don't even know it, but they do know it, because again, it's these unsaid little social cues that Woolf is a master at articulating in this type of form, in novel form like this. So yeah, I just had to say that because it's fucking great. Like, also at that dinner scene, I wrote down here is like, so we already talked about the theme of kind of like male, female, the forever kind of battle of the sexes type thing. I think that's another thing you see perfectly laid out, because you're jumping between all these characters' heads. You're jumping between the male perspective and the female perspective, how they're looking at one another, how they know how that person is looking at them, type thing, right? Like, it's not
Yeah.
like it's same thing in like social, like when somebody's admiring you, or like checking you out, like all, and it's like nothing is said, but you see the eyes, right? Like, you see the eyes, you see the way that they shift in their chair, like all this kind of shit that just clues you into what's happening, instead of giving us this long back and forth dialogue or something like that. And I just think it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I texted you right after reading that scene, just being like, my God. Because it was like the last thing I read on like one of my reading times when I was reading this book, and I ended up on that chapter. It's long, so I was like, all right, well, I'll finish this long chapter and then call it a day. And like, I was just enthralled. Like, I texted you right away. I was like, oh my God, dude, that dinner scene, holy shit. If I could write
Yeah.
half as well as that, like, holy shit, dude. But yeah, I mean, what do you think? I mean, I don't want
Ugh.
to just praise it. There were a couple of things I underlined in that chapter. The one I already read you about Lily's kind of Miss Ramsey. Just beautiful prose, man. I mean, just there are things I just underlined because I thought they were brilliantly articulated, or they're just like absolutely great. Um, One of the lines, her own poverty of spirit.
Ugh. Yeah. I mean, so that idea that, this, I mean, so the dinner scene, I think, is also like a show between men and women, and it's where we start to get this sense of Mr. Ramsey. I mean, we already have this sense of him, but I think it kind of becomes developed, the sense of him as someone who must, um, like, he needs to sort of dominate in a situation. He needs people to submit to him, which later, much later on, sort of turns to like the need for sympathy, which is like almost um put about, like, it comes about as allowing him to dominate a situation from the woman's side, which is really interesting. But I
Right.
think, like, we get this sort of interaction. Well, it's not really an interaction, it's an observation from Mrs. Ramsey that, and this is from memory, I can't find the page, but um, that they were, well, first of all, in the first part of this novel, they keep talking about Shakespeare, right? Who really enjoys reading Shakespeare, and how long will Shakespeare be remembered anyway? And Mr. Ramsey seems kind of obsessed with this question and is like reading some article in the paper about it or something.
Oh yeah.
Like, and, um, you know, was it him that's asserting that, most people who read it don't actually enjoy it anyway?
Heavy board.
They're just pretending to, yeah.
Literature
Um,
bores me, especially great literature. Yeah.
um, but
Absolutely brilliant.
meanwhile, like, then this is where it feels so full and it never ever one-sided. Like, because
Right.
Mrs. Ramsey is there also being like, and he's thinking of, he's sitting there like worrying about himself, like, and how, like, will he be forgotten? And like, um, will, you know, like, because by this point, so like he has his book out, but it's been years now, and like, so that sort of flame has died out a little bit, and he's like, will I be remembered? And he's like, just obsessed with Shakespeare, and like he's seen through the eyes of Mrs. Ramsey as this sort of pitiful creature, um, who sees the work of like the house and just sort of general silliness and like just playfulness as like a kind of nonsense.
Yeah.
And the men are sort of described that way. It's not just him either. I would say more subtly other characters. Maybe not so much Carmichael, the opium addict poet, who's just somewhere all the time and sort of openly asked for more soup, which disgusted Mr. Ramsey, I think. I think it was Mr. Ramsey. But like at the dinner, he asks for more soup, and Mr. Ramsey's all pissed about it. Or maybe it's Mrs. Ramsey knowing that Mr. Ramsey will be all pissed about it.
All right. I'm gonna highlight because this is one of the things I did from Banks right during that dinner scene, um, in chapter 17 of the part one, where we're in. I think it's one of the few places we get Banks thing at that dinner, and he's sitting next to Miss Ramsey, and I think they kind of describe the table as okay, it's very old school, kind of like dining where servants or housekeepers, whatever, footmen or whatever, are serving you, and they had Mr. Ramsey's at one head of the table, Miss Ramsey's at the other, and then the guests are kind of scattered in between. But anyway, Banks is sitting next to her, and he's just asking himself at this point as he's trying to keep up conversation. He's like, "Is human life this? Is human life that?" One never had time to think about it. But here he was asking himself that sort of question, because Miss Ramsey was giving orders to servants, and also because it had struck him, thinking how surprised Miss Ramsey was that Carrie Manning should still exist, that friendships, even the best of them, are frail things. One drifts apart. He reproached himself again. He was sitting beside Miss Ramsey, and he had nothing in the world to say to her. "I'm so sorry," said Miss Ramsey, turning to him at last. He felt rigid and barren, like a pair of boots that has been soaked and gone dry, so that you can hardly force your feet into them. Yet he must force his feet into them. He must make himself talk. Unless he were very careful, she would find out this treachery of his, that he did not care a straw for her, and that would not be at all pleasant, he thought. So he bent his head courteously in her direction. And again, this is all interspersed with like little bits of dialogue. But yeah. Sorry, that was on page 65 in chapter 17 of my version.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where these moments are in my version.
Thinking how surprised Miss Ramsey was that Carrie Manning should still exist, that friendships, even the best of them, are frail things. That line alone made me underline this section, but then, yeah, just using it as this example of Banks is sitting next to Miss Ramsey, doesn't really like her, but he has to force himself to talk to her because they're sitting next to each other at this dinner.
Oh, yeah, I found it. Okay, it's page 89 in mine.
Nice. How you must detest dining in this bare garden, she said, making use, as she did when she was distracted, of her social manner.
God, I forgot about that moment we get Mr. Banks.
It's like a very brief glimpse, too, and it's about just because he's one of the people sitting at the table. And, like,
Yeah.
we're all sitting around a dinner party, or not even dinner parties. All these people are actually, like, staying at the house, right? Like the summer house. I guess that was a big thing back then when you were kind of wealthy, is you just had like artists and shit stay at your summer house with you for like months. Like a painter like Lily would just come and be like, "Oh yes, I'd love to stay for free at your house and paint all day." Like, they like, "Oh, that would be lovely." Writers, all that kind of shit. Yeah, like, come write your novel here. Come finish it up.
Yeah. How trifling it all is. How boring it all is, he thought, compared with the other thing, work. He sat there drumming his fingers on the tablecloth when he might have been. He took a flashing bird's eye view of his work.
That Ramsey or
I think that's Mr. Banks.
Banks? Yeah, that
What
long
a waste of
paragraph.
time it was.
Yeah.
What a waste of time it all was, to be sure. Yet, he thought, she is one of my oldest friends. Yet now, yet now at this moment, her presence meant absolutely nothing to him. Her beauty meant nothing to him.
Yeah.
The truth was that he did not enjoy family life. And like that seems to be sort of the theme with them, like with some of the men in the book, but also, yeah, this idea that men get like absorbed in work and the world of thoughts and like, you know, causes external to family. And that like Mrs. Ramsey, as the woman of this house, like has this gift
Yeah.
of creating like moments for people, which is also something that recurs. But her biggest, I feel like her most sort of meditative moments come when they talk about the waves. The waves is like this recurring image that I guess describes thought.
Dude, right there at the end of that same section there, I think this is about either Ramsey or Tansley. Of course, Ramsey had dished himself. I think, I don't know. But anyway, it's like he felt extremely, even physically, uncomfortable. He wanted somebody to give him a chance of asserting himself. He wanted it so urgently that he fidgeted in his chair, looked at this person, then at that person, tried to break into their talk, opened his mouth and shut it again. They were talking about the fishing industry. Why did no one ask him his opinion? What did they know about the fishing industry? Lily Briscoe knew all that. I think it was Tansley she's talking about, yeah. Because Tansley's the one Lily hates because he said women can't write or paint or whatever. So she, like, hates this guy.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really have to track it back that far
Yeah,
to
yeah.
find out whose thoughts you're thinking.
Yeah, it's funny because in that paragraph we start with Miss Ramsey,
Yeah.
and then halfway through that paragraph we move on to Mr. Banks interjecting, and then we switch to Tansley's point of view, like in the middle of the same sentence.
Yeah, well, Mrs. Ramsey at this dinner is sort of operating as like a kind of weird linchpin, you know?
Right.
Like everyone at whom she directs an interaction, we sort of get that person's internal monologue.
So I mean, and
So
it
she's
does.
like the transition.
But as you're reading it, you do follow along with like the progression, like the jumping from
Yeah,
here to there because you're kind of
it makes
across the
sense.
table. Yeah. And
But
it
you do have to like the sentences are long and sometimes you do have to track back for a while if you're like there were paragraphs that I had to read and reread. And I still feel like I need to reread this book to fully get at it. It's one of those that has so much going on that you can read it and find something new every time.